It's good to see so many people here, and sorry it's a little hot. There's a lot of bodies in here, but I'm Wenda Hasey. I'm the training strategist and innovation manager at BAVAC. I just want to say welcome to our Gig Union Town Hall. Let me give you a little bit of background on Gig Union in general. In early 2013, the city of San Francisco partnered with BAVAC to provide support to freelancers and entrepreneurs like yourself. This was unprecedented. Contract-based workers are generally excluded from government funding, but with an innovation grant from the Federal Department of Labor, Gig Union was created. And since April of 2013, over 500 people have registered to be Gig Union members, so we're just a fraction of how many people are really part of this community. We've had 60 people attend our peer portfolio reviews. We've had hundreds of people attend workshops on how to do taxes, start a business, and set goals. We've brought you experts who've demystified GitHub and data visualization, and you may have joined us at one of our 7 Nerd Undergrounds at places like Twitter, Zendesk, and Jawbone. Or maybe you were even at Mozilla, where we asked a group of panelists why women coders matter. But why are all of you here today? That's probably the most important question. Like BAVAC, you probably have noticed we're in the midst of a major economic shift, the likes of which we've never seen probably since the Industrial Revolution. Freelancing is becoming the new normal. Technology is allowing more people to choose the independence of freelancing, but it's also pushing people into contract-based work as more employers seek to cut costs and eliminate risk. On top of that, people want the autonomy of being their own boss, but this gets at the heart of why we even name this community Gig Union. A fragmented, hyper-competitive, contract-based market could be seen as a corporate dream, but freelancers don't need to be the underdog in this scenario. In fact, this year, for the first time since 1998, the government has enacted a new workforce act, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, to help Americans find work. The White House Office of Science and Technology invited BAVAC to be part of a table to make sure freelancers like you can get some support through their funding. But to be honest, maybe government isn't part of this conversation. And that's why we're here today. We want to hear your voice. We want to hear your opinion. This afternoon, we're going to chew on some pretty heavy, big issues. They might seem impossible to solve, but hopefully we can discuss how to create meaningful independence and also find ways to create safety nets and infrastructure for this growing community of workers. So enough of me talking. Let me tell you how the afternoon's gonna unfold. Next up is Carol Varney, our executive director at BAVAC. She'll say a few words to all of you. And then our moderator, Steve, here will introduce our panelists and then let them say a few words about who they are and what they do. Then we'll dive into the panel for about an hour, and then around 5 o'clock, we'll open up the floor for questions or comments. So people can feel free to come up and use this mic or just shout from the back. And then after that, we'll have some time to eat all that food and drink all the drinks and just hang out and talk. So how does that sound to everybody? Good? Yeah, all right. Woohoo! Cool. So I will pass the mic to Carol.
Hi, everyone. I also want to thank you all for coming today. It's great to see so many people on a Friday afternoon here to hear about Gig Union and freelancers. I also need to give a shout out to the City of San Francisco's Office of Economic and Workforce Development, who had the great foresight several years ago to think that entrepreneurs in San Francisco are actually freelancers. Freelancers are entrepreneurs, and it's something that I feel like in San Francisco is it's an interesting time to be thinking about that. You hear a lot about entrepreneurs in San Francisco, but do you think of freelancers as entrepreneurs? And at BAVAC, we always have. So it's exciting to have Gig Union and to have the support from the city to do panels like this and work like Wenda has spearheaded. And I also want to thank the staff for putting this together and all of the other events that happen through Gig Union. So I hope to see all of you at more of those in the future. I also am here to introduce Steve Goldbloom, who is our moderator today. Thank you, Steve, for being here. Steve started out his illustrious career as a segment producer for PBS NewsHour. Yes?
Right.
And then moved to San Francisco to work for one of our sister organizations, ITVS. They are the biggest funder nationally of independent documentary film, and you were the marketing manager there, I believe.
That's correct.
And then, in his own entrepreneurial streak, decided that there was something missing from the public media landscape, and that was a news program that would tread the line between satirical and serious news about the tech boom. And he went on to create something that's funded by PBS Digital called Everything But the News, and it's my favorite show on the internet and on PBS, and I hope you have all seen it, and if you haven't, I hope you will soon. And with that, I will turn it over to Steve to introduce our panelists.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's a huge privilege to be able to be here at BAVAC and talk about today's subject, talking about some of the big issues facing contract workers in the Bay Area. We're going to talk about freelancing, we're going to talk about workers' rights, we're going to talk about how to work in a village economy, and we're also going to talk about ultimately how to go from the steady monogamous 9-to-5 schedule into the endlessly satisfying and exciting space of open relationships. That was, so I don't know if you saw that on the agenda, but I think that was a late edition, open relationship. So just be excited about that. If I wasn't moderating, I would for sure be here because as Carol said, I'm shifting right now from a 9-to-5 schedule into a freelance schedule. I work, as she said, down the street at ITVS, the independent television service, which is a fantastic organization, and my boss is in the audience. So let me just repeat that again. It is a fantastic organization, and my boss is in the audience. And it really is a great place. But at the end of the month, I'm going to be going to start an LLC and do the show Everything But the News through there and do more production services through that organization. And it's exciting and it's very scary because you move away from the security of health insurance, resources, supervision, for better or for worse, and the endless camaraderie and morale of just working with great people. So it's scary, and at the same time it's very exciting. And so that's why I'm really glad that I get to introduce these great panelists to speak about some of the big issues facing contract workers. So let me just introduce them to you now. I'm going to introduce all of you, and after I introduce each of you, please, if you could in return just say a little bit about yourself and why you're here. So I'm going to start, Rena Tom, with you. Rena's the founder of Makeshift Society. They offer shared workspace and resources to creative freelancers in San Francisco and in Brooklyn. She's also the market editor at Anthology magazine and an accomplished entrepreneur whose businesses have been featured everywhere from the New York Times to Martha Stewart weddings. Welcome.
Thank you. You said it all. I'm
you could
covered.
say more. You could say more.
Thank you. I'm here because I have been working, I guess, freelancing and working on my own since 2000, and somehow I've made a go of it, so I feel pretty good about that. I've seen lots of shifts in that time and have been trying to help people through that as well, through some of the consulting work I do, and now with Makeshift, which really is a special spot for people who feel like they need support, moral support, financial support sometimes, accountability, and plus that place to work, and they feel maybe a little marginalized in this town especially, which has shifted to so much about tech and making $1 million or $1 billion, right? Sometimes we want to stay small and survive and work the way we want to. So I'm really interested in that topic and want to talk more about that today.
Great. Thanks. And next I want to introduce Susie Cagle, who is a freelance journalist and editorial cartoonist. Her work regularly appears in Wired, The Atlantic, Boston Review, Cartoon Movement, McSweeney's, among many, many others. Susie is also a 2013 International Women's Media Foundation grantee. Before all that, she completed her master's in journalism from Columbia, which, as Susie points out, still does not offer a class in cartooning. So welcome, Susie.
So I have been a freelancer for almost the entirety of my working adult life by basically no choice of my own. That's the thing that happens in journalism over the last few years. There aren't any jobs. And I I've been employed for the total of 1 year out of my 8 years as a journalist. That was in 2 different jobs. And I actually started to draw after I got laid off from my first job after being employed for 3 months. I was laid off a week before Christmas, 2008, and decided to take it as an opportunity to learn a different skill. And that's kind of cut both ways for me. It's been really great. I have a different skill set to earn a different sort of income, differentiate myself in a crowded marketplace full of other laid-off journalists, other freelance writers. But it also, it's an odd thing to be an independent worker who doesn't fit into a clear box. You have a bunch of different skills, and you're trying to promote yourself, and editors are really easily confused. Why do you do both of these things? We're used to people who do one thing. You can't survive if you do one thing these days. So I am also really interested in writing about freelance work in the capacity of my journalism. I've especially been covering the sharing economy lately. So I'm curious to especially talk about how we are shifting our language around freelancing in terms of it being a wonderful opportunity and not just a survival mechanism.
Yeah, thank you, Susie. And I have seen some of your pieces. It's a great blend of creative work and written work, so it is a really cool hybrid. Our next panelist actually convinced me to use his new production services company in about 60 seconds, so he's very, very good when we got in here. Misha Sundukovskiy is a video producer and director and founder of GoForCrew, a national network devoted to connecting people in film production. He's worked with some of the world's top brands, creating content for places like Bacardi, the Black Eyed Peas, Nike, Saturday Night Live, and many more. Welcome.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity to come chat. I think that some of these issues that we're talking about are super, super important. I think as freelancing becomes bigger and more prevalent in the United States, that these are things that more and more people are going to have to deal with. And as someone I've worked both as a freelancer for a number of years, as well as a full-time employee at agencies and at bigger companies, so I've gotten a chance to see both sides of the token a little bit. I think that both have certain hardships, freelancing especially, with particularly the way that it becomes kind of 3 different jobs. That's what I like to say, is that finding work is one job, doing the work is another job, and then getting paid for the work is a whole separate job, which is probably the hardest part of it. Sitting around and netting 30, 60 days on an invoice becomes very difficult when you're trying to pay the rent that you can't net 60 days on. So yeah, so I'm really happy to be here and excited that I got asked to be a part of this.
Great, welcome. And finally, Denise Cheng is an independent researcher who, until very recently, was at MIT figuring out how to build a worker support infrastructure around peer-to-peer marketplaces. Her work has been covered everywhere from NPR to the Harvard Business Review. Denise was recently funded by the Microsoft Research for Fieldwork to study some of the barriers to participating in the peer economy. So welcome.
Hi, everyone. So I am only recently a freelancer. I just moved out here 2.5 months ago. So this has been a really fun ride. And I guess I'm more or less known for looking at what sometimes people call the sharing economy, and I call peer-to-peer marketplaces, groups like Etsy, Skillshare, B&B, Lyft, Uber, where people are trying to monetize skills and assets they already have. And I usually look at it from the worker perspective rather than the company perspective. So are people protected from bodily harm? Are they protected from racial discrimination? Are they supported? Is this really something where they can make a living wage? If not, and this is maybe here to stay, maybe not, but if it were this sort of gig situation, what support needs to happen, basically. But before I was at MIT, I was actually working on the other side of things to Susie, who, am I too close, or, okay. Okay, so I was working on the other side to Susie, which is how to create business models for the future of journalism, because a lot of the work that Susie does and a lot of the work that other journalists do is incredibly important, but more and more as Susie pointed out, journalism doesn't have any jobs, but the function is still incredibly important. So much of the work that I've been doing has been community organizing around a lot of different types of experimental news outlets, as well as helping to figure out strategy for business sustainability.
Great. Thank you. So why don't I'm going to start off with a few questions, and I'll aim them at you. But please, when you're finished, if anybody wants to respond, just jump in, and you and me can share a mic. So that's easy. I want to start, Rena, with you. You're pretty wired into the creative freelance space and communal space. What advice do you have for freelancers out there who are looking to leverage their personal networks to find more work?
Ooh. I can answer that, but I will just say, because I like to say this, that I hate jargon, so I might shit all over stuff.
You can shit all over whatever
okay,
you want,
sorry.
I guess.
just disclaimer. So leveraging your personal network is, of course networks are very important, and that's a giant reason of why I started my space. It's I feel it's very important that no, you can't work at home alone all the time, or you can't even sit in a coffee shop and work surrounded by people. That vibe is really good, but there is something about being in a space where there are other people, not only who are doing good, similar work, but you can lean over and say, can you just look at this for a second? Or I'm kind of having a bad day, do you want to go walk and get a coffee? Or what are you working on? I need a little break. So I think it's important to break up one's day in that way. You're getting work done, but you're also forging some relationships with other people, and I think that's super important. So I would say, make sure that you're going to events like this, but also have some places that you feel like are home bases. We don't want to be the everything for everybody. We don't want people to just show up at our space every single day either. That's why we're very flexible, and we're okay if seeing you once a week or once a month if it comes down to that. But I think for a lot of people who are doing freelance work, you do feel kind of adrift a lot of the time, and you feel like you need to ground every so often. And so whether that's just talking with friends or talking with a specific work group or a peer group, all of that is going to be very valuable. So
I was thinking if freelancing, I just started working out of the office, and to me it's a bit like opening up Netflix or Spotify and having no idea what to watch or listen to. It's just so vast. So what specific examples, just to stay on you for a second, do you see people coming in where they've created an opportunity or a small business from different discourses where they came in and worked together?
We are seeing some collaboration happen. It's not actually expected of everybody, and that's another thing going on with my particular thing, which is the co-working movement, where they're promising community and engagement and collaboration, and that's not always going to happen, and you don't always want that to happen. Sometimes you just need to sit down and get your work done, right? So everyone, I feel, has different phases to their work, like Misha was saying. Sometimes you're in seek work mode, and maybe that means trying to engage the network a little bit more and ask around, has anyone heard of anything? Or I'm kind of free for the next 2 weeks. What's going on in the world, And then other times you have that project and you just need to sit down and put the headphones on and get some work done. And then when you're done, then you can blow off some steam too. So I don't know, does that help?
That helps. What about the cost?
The cost?
Yeah.
What about the cost?
How do you afford to keep the place in business, and how do you pay for everything?
Oh, yeah, that's hard.
Sorry. Jargon.
Great. Money. I don't know. I'm not really good at making money, I will say.
Neither am I.
No, I think, I don't know. This is why I like to think about this problem so much, is that my business is not structured as a nonprofit. And we do that on purpose. We do that because we feel that we're a space made by creative freelancers and for them. And if I was to be a nonprofit taking money in a different way, how am I going to show a good example to all of you about how to do it? So I think what's really important for me is I sit in my space and I'm kind of cranking away, and I have the same problems as you guys do too. And sometimes people will come up and have a conversation with me. And again, it's that feeling less alone, and maybe getting some tips about how you can look for more work, or can you intro me to that person, and seeing what comes out of it. It's hard to manufacture work, But the more you're willing to bump into folks and listen to people and talk to other people, the more work I think will happen to you naturally.
Well, Misha, you've moved around a lot. You've worked for different places and had full-time jobs and moved from freelance to a more entrepreneurial force in setting up your video production company. So what was that experience like, shifting from freelance to more entrepreneur?
Well, actually, I was fortunate enough to meet Chris Blackwell, who is the owner, or who's the founder of Island Records, which was Bob Marley's record label. It was U2's record label for a long time. And I had a really short Q&A session with him. And I actually asked him something very similar. I was like, how do you balance, trying to pursue your creative aspirations with pursuing the basic needs to make money and the basic needs to survive and, kind of your aspirations to be an entrepreneur? And he had a very simple answer that sticks with me to this day. He told me the creative mind is the entrepreneurial mind. It's the same thing. Don't try to distinguish them and try to make them two separate entities. Use them, and basically as you become better at entrepreneurial activities, you also get more creative. And I actually, all the entrepreneurs that I met who I do really admire, I see that in them. Whether we're talking about creativity on a video or a painting or a drawing level, they have creativity in their own right with just their abilities to come up with interesting ideas for their companies. And something actually to add a point to what Rena was talking about in terms of advice for freelancers, things that I found, just things that have worked personally, have been relationships. I think ultimately life comes down to interpersonal relationships, whether it's business, whether it's personal. I think we all kind of say that saying, we live in a small world pretty often, but it is really true. It is a really small world, and I think if anything, what technology is doing is making it smaller. And even though we are the most connected, but maybe the least communicative in the history of the world, we do live in this pretty small circle of people, especially within these industries. So a colleague of mine used to just say, listen, I keep tabs on 6 or 7 different production companies all the time, and I'm always just checking in with them just to say, hey, how's it going? How are things going? And I think that that's like a really great piece of advice that I've gotten throughout the years is, even if you are looking for work, don't necessarily approach it in a sense of like, hey, do you have a job for me? But hey, what are you guys up to right now? How can I be of help? How can I be in the mix, I
told you it was about open relationships, right? It's true though. You're doing work with lots of people, and I know, you had some experience with Saturday Night Live, and it sounds like, what a great brand that is, but you were able to sort of leverage them to be able to say, well, we're working with SNL, and then when you bring that over to Nike, that looks pretty good. And then when you bring that over to Bayvac, that looks great. When you bring it, is he looking for jobs? Yeah. I'm just saying it must be really helpful for you. So you've been able to leverage some of those brands in the interest of, creating from what I saw, it looks like a very, cool and vast app.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just to kind of speak to what you're talking about, GoForCrew is the organization that I started about 8 months ago, and we have about 3,000 people that have signed up already, and basically the whole mission behind it is to make producing and freelancing easier. On one side, we want to help producers save time when they need to find a last-minute production assistant or a last-minute sound mixer anywhere in the country, and at the same time, we want to help freelancers get more jobs. So it's kind of like an online dating profile if you want to talk more about open relationships. Here we go. No, we're done. We're done with the open relationship chat.
I don't think we want to go there.
It's kind of like an online dating profile for somebody in terms of work. And basically what I really want to do is I want to protect the integrity of the freelancers, and we want to help them find more jobs, and at the same time guarantee them that they're going to get paid in 7 to 10 business days after that job is complete, which I think is a huge point that differentiates us from some of the other competitors that are out there. And the response that we've gotten back has been phenomenal. People love it. People are contacting me from Italy, from New Zealand, like, we want this internationally. So we're kind of at that moment where we're building the back end of the service, and right now what's online, if you go to GoForCrew.com, is a connection platform, and it's totally free, and people are using it and enjoying it. But the next step is going to be actually getting everybody onboarded onto the actual platform, showcasing their portfolios, and we're planning a really simple onboarding process. And sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent to plug my own shit, but
I set you up.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
But yes, I think that the brand names do help a little bit in some regard, but at the end of the day, it always comes down to doing good work. Show up on time places, shake people's hands and look them in the eyes, and make sure that you deliver on time, what you say you're going to deliver, and that's how you really do it. Because at the end of the day, nowadays especially, everyone's doing a gig for Food Network. I got hit up last week to do a gig for Vice. There's all these big names out there, and people are getting, people are smart. People are getting hip to the fact that a name on a resume doesn't really mean anything, you know what I mean? So I did a gig for Nike way back when. If I show up and I have a chip on my shoulder and I try to walk into a room as the guy who did a gig for Nike 3 years ago, people are gonna read that really quickly and be like, who is this douche? Get him out of here, So I'd say that that's really important, is still showing up and just knowing, your awareness, self-awareness. Why are you here? What are you doing in this room,
It's so true, and it's as transparent as possible because you're being able to be reviewed. And I would say what I've learned from starting this LLC right now and starting to work with other clients is that if you, sounds awful, but if you start saying no, it kind of sounds like it can help. Like if someone says, are you interested in more work? Like literally I could be open here, it doesn't matter. We had nothing going on other than the one show, and people say, do you have time to work with us? And I say, it's pretty busy. I don't know if there's going to be time. But other than I gauge the two, but the other response was, yes, please come work with us. And people didn't like that as much. So it was sort of feeling it out. Moving on, Susie, I want to ask you about your experience with all of this, both as a freelance journalist and as a freelance journalist covering the shared economy. What trends are you seeing? What have you been looking at?
I work from home, and I work from home all day, every day. It never ends. And I really rely a lot on the internet for my social networks. And people genuinely don't believe me when I say that I have really gotten most of my work and my breaks through Twitter, but it's absolutely true. It's a great place for me to do little cartoons and be witty and topical and get the attention of people who I wanted to get the attention of. And it's absolutely been the best thing for my career, absolutely, bar none. And I think that there's kind of this impression that you can't build a platform on those kinds of networks, that you can't just go in with 0 followers and make it over the course of several years purely by being good at it, but you can. So that's been great. A big part of why it has been great for me is because I got arrested while I was reporting, and I was able to tweet about it, which was really helpful because nobody was coming for me. I had no boss. I had nobody that was going to back me up. I had nobody that was going to call the jail and say, don't do that, she's a journalist. Even after I got out of jail, there was, on all of the media blogs, there was a lot of speculation as to why I was arrested and why it was okay that I was arrested because I was a freelancer. You don't have institutional support, you are not considered a journalist by government standards, by local police standards. If you look at how you get a press pass for Congress or covering the federal government, local governments, freelancers don't count. And I was hoping that would spark some sort of interest in more rights for freelance journalists. You look around the world, if we're talking about the kind of news that we're getting from conflict zones across, who's going to Syria? It's a lot of people who don't have jobs. It's a lot of people who don't know who they're going to sell a story to. They go there, they pay out of pocket to get there, and then they try to string while they're there. They try to sell stories. And it puts them in danger. They don't have anybody that's going to help them. And so that's something that I really care about. It's not something that I've seen, I guess, a lot of energy around doing anything about. It's really difficult to get those things changed. And a big part of that is because journalism institutions rely on freelancers. We are really cheap for them. It's cheap content. It's cheap grist for the mill. And they need that. They have very expensive editors in-house who are editing and publishing cheap content from freelancers. And freelancers who are doing that cheap content because they're hoping to get a staff job. And what actually ends up happening for a lot of people, and this is what's happened to me, and I finally embraced it. I finally embraced being a freelancer this year. after many years of really trying to get a staff job and having a hard time, because once you freelance for a certain amount of time, there's this perception that you just want to keep freelancing. You don't want a job. You've been independent for so long, you can't possibly want a job. You must be choosing that. And a lot of that comes from people who've bounced from staff job to staff job, and they've been very comfortable, and they don't really understand what it's like to be a freelancer, and they don't understand that there are a lot of people doing it just because they need to survive. And that's really what got me interested in covering the sharing economy. And I actually started covering the sharing economy in one of my blips of a staff job last year. And it was really interesting for me to see internally. I got a lot of pushback. I was saying, this Lyft and Uber stuff sounds really creepy to me. And my editor going, I think it's great. It's going to be awesome. And there was just this huge gap in terms of understanding about what it's like to need to survive and need to make money. And it was actually ended up really being very difficult to publish those stories. And I think that we've seen, this was last June, July that I was writing those stories, and it was really out ahead. It was during a time when we were really, as a culture, very excited about Lyft and Uber and all of the opportunities that they presented for workers and for us needing travel because we have terrible public transit. And it's funny to me to have seen the shift that I think has just happened over the last couple months, that I think that we are now perceiving these things as really huge potential problems. I don't know where that's going to go. I hope that goes toward genuine government reforms and regulations. I'm not convinced yet, but it is exciting for me to feel like the stuff that I was saying a few months ago, let alone a year ago, is now like it's not controversial. That's weird.
I want to stay on, and then we'll get back to Denise. We'll come back to you with protection and disruption of the government and their perception of freelance. But staying on shared economy for a second, I just moved to LA for work, and Lyft, Uber, Sidecar all move there in a big way, and they're really competing, and it's like nothing. Their prices are nothing until people start using it, and then they'll surge up, I'm sure. But I was in an Uber, and there were 4 iPhones duct taped to the dash. And I said, what are you doing with all those phones on the dash? And because he was just like toggling back and forth between the apps, and he's like, well, there's Lyft, I do Uber as well, and I have TaskRabbit over here, I use that over here. I didn't know what the 4th one was for. We never went there. So aside from praying for my life, I was wondering, how an on-demand economy, takes full advantage of the fact that the supply of workers greatly outstrips the demand. And Susie, you wrote this in an article called "The Case Against Sharing." You said the sharing economy's success is inextricably tied to the economic recession, making new American poverty palatable. It's disaster capitalism. I suspect that's the article that got a lot of. What did you mean by that?
Yeah. It's, Airbnb specifically, they talk about how we're creating new opportunities for people to leverage their homes and make money. And at the same time, Airbnb is, the platform of Airbnb is taking a tremendous toll on the housing market. It's arguably driving up the cost of living. It's making it so that you have to rent out that room in your apartment just to be able to keep your apartment. And there's no sense of the totality of that sort of economic transaction that, I find that incredibly disturbing. But I think that, we're only going to go further down this road, and I guess it's surprising to me that, a big part of what Lyft and Uber say is that we're taking cars off the road. There's no evidence that they're taking cars off the road. I see more cars on the road than ever before, and there's this underlying argument of that this is all good for the environment that I find incredibly insidious, if not an outright goddamn lie, that is totally outrageous to me, because there actually could be a lot of good in, collaborative consumption. There are ways for us to share rides in cars that can take cars off the road. That's not what this is. This is taking advantage of people who need to make money right now. And something that when I was reporting on Lyft last summer, and it was still pretty new, one of the people I was talking to was a friend of mine who's driving for Lyft. She was in grad school, wanted to be a museum curator, definitely did not want to be a cab driver, but that's what she was doing to be able to pay for school. And she saw her rates go from like $25 an hour and to like 10, 15 when Lyft just hired a bunch more people, because these companies, these platforms have no reason to not hire as many people as possible. They have every reason to flood the market with their service. They don't give a crap if you individually are making money, if they as the platform are making more.
Well, yes, please, jump in. Yes, sorry.
Okay, so a lot of what you're referring to, the environmental stuff, the sort of idea of community and all those things are what I often call the ideology around peer-to-peer marketplaces or the sharing economy or collaborative consumption. And when you strip all of those things away, you really have the situation at hand is that basically people are using these platforms to make money. So there are situations where this can be incredibly exploitative, especially in situations where people want to create a full income off of these platforms, and they may be cobbling together that income from multiple platforms, or maybe just from one platform. But that doesn't mean that there aren't people who benefit from it, and that's something that should be understood as well. So there are people who don't necessarily, who maybe were drivers at one point for a taxi company or for a shuttle company, and this is a way in which they can kind of move laterally and still make about the same amount of money even after taxes. And what they have at that point is a flexibility in schedule. So it doesn't change the income inequality issue, but it does give people a little bit more flexibility and freedom, and that's really important to people when they want to spend time with their families rather than having to work the night shift so that they have to sleep during the day, right? There are also people who are traditionally, who are defined out of the traditional workplace. So Etsy is a great example of this. It's something like 97% of Etsy users or Etsy sellers are women. A lot of them are stay-at-home parents. And so they can't necessarily work a schedule where they have to be at an office from this time to this time, and they cannot leave at any other point. But by using these platforms, which some of them allow you to work from almost anywhere, you're able to choose when you want to start and stop, and you're also able to take care of some of the other things that are really important to you. That doesn't mean that your income is fully taken care of, but that's to say that there are some other benefits besides just looking at it from purely a monetary perspective.
I want to stick on that a little bit and stay on Lyft. I tried driving a Lyft, by the way, for our show. We did it, and I tried it, and it turns out I'm a terrible Lyft driver. I don't know when to talk, when not to talk, and the whole thing. And it was, and it's scary because I actually thought we were going to get into an accident. Which, we interviewed the CEOs for our show, Travis Kalanick of Uber, the guys from Sidecar and Lyft, and I kind of liked talking to Kalanick. I'm not saying I liked Travis Kalanick, the CEO over. I liked talking to him because he was more honest. Everyone else was like, well, we don't want to take cars off the road. We want to take cars off the road. And he was like, I just want to make a ton of money. And I will. And we said, okay. And I said, well, are these your employers, And he's like, no. Well, they are until they, basically, and of course he did not say this, but until they get into an accident, then they're partners. They're just partners. So I want to talk a little bit about protection. And are algorithms like that of Ubers, Lyfts, TaskRabbits, you name it, replacing unions as a champion for workers' rights?
I don't think these groups are the ones to look to for championing workers' rights. I mean, none of them are employees, and they want to keep it that way because that's how they keep their margins really low, and that's how they're able to make their money. And that's really the problem, right, is the protections for workers. And I'm not surprised that Travis said that, because when I met him, he said that really, technically, everybody is an independent contractor and Uber is your client. So he's pretty straight, and I think he also said that he welcomes the day when there are self-driving cars so that he can get rid of his whole fleet of independent contractors. And I've also heard him at city council meetings, or not him, but people who work for Uber refer to their drivers as business partners and their software as, what was it? They said they offer a software service that's like a matching software, basically. So he's very, very specific about keeping those lines very clear. But anyhow, I'm sorry, there was something I was going to answer. Oh, you were asking about workers' rights. So first, that wouldn't happen algorithmically at all. I mean, maybe it would be a situation where because when you have your phone on, for example, if you're on Lyft or Uber, or even if you're in TaskRabbit and en route, right? Because that was one of the things that they used to brag about, is like you can see where your TaskRabbit is and how close your TaskRabbit is to you. I mean, there are situations there where you can say like, hey, I got hurt or something happened while I was on the job, right? But ultimately the problem again is that you don't have protection. Now what you have is a record. So that's the only way in which I can see these platforms being in any way useful to a worker perspective, is having that record as data, right? If they're willing to even share that data with you. But it exists. In terms of the groups that are out there replacing labor unions, first off, I don't think labor unions are getting replaced, they're just dying. So that's something to kind of keep in mind, and that's another thing actually. So the peer economy is not replacing gainful employment. Gainful employment itself was already dying pre-recession. Dying is probably a really strong word here, but basically since the 80s, that type of work has been going down, and the number of benefits that you can count on has definitely been going down with it. Basically in the 80s, there was a clarification in IRS tax code that made companies realize that they actually didn't have to pay all these defined benefits. They didn't really have to offer you retirement or health insurance or any of these other things, and that actually like they could cut a lot of costs that way and be even more competitive. So this is not something that just started in the last like even 10 years. It started quite a while ago. And so even when you look at the job gains right now with what the Bureau of Labor Statistics puts out every week, what you see are actually job gains in seasonal employment. You see that it's in retail or in construction, right? Things that aren't gonna be there in a couple months. So that's something to keep in mind when people say like, oh look, jobs just went up this month. But yeah, so kind of indirectly, I don't think labor unions are getting replaced. I think labor unions themselves have outdated tactics that don't really work very well, especially because more people are becoming independent contractors, not by choice. And the whole labor model only works because of the employee status itself, right? It's the fact that you can't necessarily just fire somebody if they need to take a break. Like you can give them leave without pay, but you can't just fire an employee. And so it's a hard question to answer basically around rights. I think there are a lot of people who are starting to think about it. Some people think that peers might be thinking about it, which is one group. Some people think Freelancers Union might be thinking about it, which is another group. But there's also other groups entirely, right, that don't have anything to do with the peer economy. So there's a group called coworker.org, for example. And they do a lot of things that are very much like, is it change.org with the petition stuff? Right? Yeah, except that they actually offer legal support to people who are not necessarily part of unions and they don't have any interest to be in a union, but they may be working for a group like Walmart or McDonald's, or they may be at Starbucks and they want to, I think one of their most recent campaigns was Starbucks employees who really wanted to make it acceptable to show their tattoos at work. Right? And that became a really, really big campaign. And this is something that people really cared about. And then because of that, they're now more in tune with other things that they're going to need as employees of Starbucks, including raises. And so it's kind of grown on coworker.org from going from tattoos now to some of the other issues. But it starts with what people care about. So there's not really any answer that's out there right now. There are people who are thinking about it. Some groups are just thinking and talking and not doing anything. Some groups are trying to do little experiments here and there.
But Lyft and Uber drivers are organizing right now. They are not unionizing in the traditional sense because they are independent contractors, but they are forming things like the Drivers Network, which is based in San Francisco and is nationwide now. And there's like different groups of Lyft and Uber drivers, and I guess Sidecar and other. And they're also including taxi drivers as well, all across the country in major metropolitan areas where they have enough leverage in the market, and they're actually winning. Yes, they can't do things like force arbitration in the case of someone getting fired, but it does become the supply and demand thing. There are enough of them that they can make demands, and they do win small battles. One of the ones that happened relatively recently in San Francisco was, one of the big hurdles to even being a part of this sharing economy is what do you already own that you can share? What can you rent out? And you have to own a car or be leasing a car. And you have to own or lease a relatively new car. And Uber said, well, you need to, they came out and said, your cars need to be newer. And so the drivers said, no, we won't go for that. And there were enough of them that protested and pushed back and said, we will all quit en masse. And Uber said, all right, okay, fine. And there are these little wins that I think are actually really important. And I, as a freelancer who works from home and just has friends on Twitter, I find it really inspiring that these are contract workers who are unionizing in a totally new way that's not at all what we think of as a union.
Well, more on freelancers uniting and coming together. In Europe, there's a freelancer collective that charges dues. In New York, they rely on freelancers on grants and other sources. So how can freelancers afford to come together and lobby government be adequately represented? And that's to anybody. Then I'll give you the mic to say it.
I feel like Susie was talking about this earlier.
Yeah, I'm actually pro paying dues, because if you pay dues into an organization, you have some sort of ownership and you have a vote. If somebody doesn't ask me for dues and they tell me, I'm just going to speak on your behalf, like what the Freelancers Union does, I absolutely don't trust them. I think they're an active enemy of a lot of freelancers and what we want to see. I don't think that they always talk, they've become kind of a lobbying arm for a lot of these sharing economy businesses, and they talk about how wonderful they are, and they present all these great opportunities, and they don't talk about the possible negatives. I think that I would love to see more collectives that are genuinely have a collective ownership. I'm happy to pay dues if it means that I get a say in what we're going to do, rather than someone just speaking for me.
But would that be from a national perspective or a local perspective? Because I can see paying dues into a national situation where you still feel no ownership in that situation because you're kind of one of many. And the thing that I was referring to, actually, that we were talking about earlier is that we were all talking about how many different industries freelancers are in right now and how that makes it really difficult to actually have a united voice.
Well, and particularly just like the nuts and bolts of the fact that when you're figuring out how to pay the rent every month, you're not necessarily putting aside money to be part of organizations or parts of clubs. Even if it is potentially beneficial to your career, it's still a tough thing to devote yourself to, because especially the more time that you spend trying to be a part of an organization, that's less time that you're spending actually actively getting work. And I don't know about your particular niches, but however, in my particular niche, it's a pretty cutthroat world of finding work. So sometimes I would even say it could be argued that sometimes it's not really beneficial for you as an individual to collectively gang up. I think in a broader sense, it totally makes sense. And what the Uber drivers are doing, I think, is fantastic. And it makes sense that they will eventually start collectively speaking as one. However, I know a lot of people who have formed, small collectives for production companies, small production companies in general, that face the same sort of problems, because at the end of the day, even if you are a band of 3 or 4 people, you're still collectively freelancing together. And I think that we currently live in this really fascinating time of contradictions, where at the same time, content is ubiquitous, and there is a ton of content all over the world all the time now, and it becomes about curation. So a lot more content is being created, but at the same time, clients are expecting that content to be created for a lot less. And it's this really weird contradiction and juxtaposition where there's technically a lot more work out there, at least in like the video space, because video is just growing and growing and growing. However, the barrier of entry is broken down so that you can record HD video with your cell phone now, and you can make feature-length films with your cell phone now, but you can't really make the same type of living that you could make off this before. Last year, I worked on the Miss Universe pageant, which is a whole different mixed bag of like contradictions and weirdnesses to it. But I got to work real closely with a photographer named Greg Harbaugh, who is an Academy Award photographer, has been doing it for 40 years. Like the guy is like a legend. You walk into a room and you can kind of just tell that this dude is somebody really important. And he's sitting there and he tells me, back in the day, you could make $50,000 a shoot, show up for a day, shoot some pretty girls and make 50 grand. And nowadays it's like, that doesn't exist anymore. Everyone just says, hey, let's go hire the kid with the DSLR, because at the end of the day, it's turned into a game of quantity versus quality in some sense, where everybody's brand is expected to have a channel and you're supposed to be cranking out content all day long. So you're not really paying as much attention to how good the content is. You're more paying attention to like, well, let's just get more stuff out, more stuff out, more stuff out, more people to view, more people to view, It's this very weird contradiction. Actually, this is a little bit of a tangent, but Robert Reich, who used to be the Secretary of Labor under Clinton, is a professor out in Berkeley, and he has this fascinating documentary out right now called Inequality for All. It talks about the gap between the rich and the poor, the wealth discrepancy currently in the country, and his argument keeps coming back to the fact that we have to have a strong middle class for us to move forward in any sort of capacity, and how what's the word I'm looking for? But how wide this gap has gotten is mimicking the 1920s, and like when the stock market crashed at the end of the 20s. So at least what he says that I found really inspiring is that ultimately he's still optimistic about the whole thing, because any time in the history of the country that we've seen such wealth discrepancy and wealth inequality, we've seen social change for the good. So perhaps some of this, Uber folks coming together, perhaps we're going to see more freelancers somehow, in fact, getting together in order to somehow bring it back towards the middle,
Hire lobbyists. I mean, that's where I'm at. I'm thinking,
you need lots of money for that one, right?
Well, but if everybody pays $10 a month, I mean, that's where I'm at. I think that we need like serious government reforms. We need to change tax policy, and on local level and on the national level. How's that going to happen? I want to pay into something that I know I'm going to get a say in, as opposed to having the freelancers union or things like the freelancers union that are interested in talking about how great this is and creating nice little tools for us online. I don't trust that they're going to send lobbyists to Washington and say what I want to happen and what's really in the best interest of people who are not making very much money.
But I think the problem with that is that it's about incentives, right? People are ruled by incentives, and the reality is government does not really government has the incentive of the opposite, right? The government has the incentive of the opposite of making sure Bitcoin is not a real thing, making sure that these peer-to-peer marketplaces that are popping up are not disrupting the unions, because the unions still to this day are the ones who have those connections with the lobbyists, those connections with government. And as much as we want to sit around and talk about disruption, ultimately public policy is what dictates this stuff, right?
So let's disrupt public policy.
Sure. Yeah, man, how do you do that? I'm just like, I think about that all the time.
Do you have something to say?
I was going to say something, but I'm trying to recall. There's too many things spinning around in my head right now. I'm like, I want to respond to everything.
I have one thing.
Go for it.
One little, I think. So what you're talking about, if people are afraid of competition, right? It's like, I still have to make money. I still have to do my job. I'm afraid of getting together with people. I think one way that maybe you could get around it is to have two layers of organization. Maybe one is a national level that talks about broader problems, and one is community level, or maybe by field or guild. Remember guilds, right? And so you could pay into to both, and one kind of takes care of you on a more macro level, and you're like, okay, someone's fighting for me, and I want this, and I think it's important, but I don't think about it every day because I have to pay the rent. And the other one is more driven by like, what does my local guild think is important? And it could be like in the Bay Area, or it could be that we're all, you know, plumbers or whatever it happens to be, but like, what are the problems going on right now? That's really important to me, getting more work and to, you know, make my way. And then there's two different directions.
I think that also helps us prevent some of the race to the bottom. I mean, there has to be some element of all of us getting together and saying, nobody's going to work for free. I think that really is that's a communication issue, and that is an organizational issue. And I tried this a few years ago with other people who do comics journalism. And there was this sense that there's a very tiny market and only one of us can be in there, and you know, whoever's the cheapest is gonna win. And it really was a matter of getting everyone together and saying, let's not do that. Let's not push each other out of this, because actually we can create a bigger space and not just buy into this false scarcity, because a lot of it is false. And a lot of times if you demand more money and you demand more money collectively, if they don't have anyone to go to who will work for free, they won't.
Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting debate about government's perception of freelance. I mean, when you step back and look at it too, 1 in 3 Americans are freelance workers, U.S. workers, over 50 million Americans. So just to stay on this one last time, I mean, there's stiff fines that can be placed on employers for hiring freelancers because they think they might be avoiding things like payroll tax. And, you know, but as the trend continues, globalization, entrepreneurship, boom, boom, get bigger and bigger, do you think government's perception of freelance as disruption will change?
So I think so I work a lot with the city of San Francisco in particular, but I've also worked with the city of Denver and a little bit the city of Boston around this whole issue of how work is going to change. And they're all really aware that things are going to change in terms of not being that gainful employment situation anymore. Some of them are thinking about how things are going to be more independent, there are going to be more freelancers, except they're not thinking about it in terms of like freelancers' creativity, the way that Freelancers Union pushes it. They're thinking freelancers' precarity. Right, and it's actually really interesting because I think that sometimes we think government is really backwards, but what's fascinating is that when, at least with the city of San Francisco, when they want to hire somebody who's an outside contractor, like a firm, they require those firms who might hire anybody else as a contractor underneath them to offer certain benefits, basically. Like they have to pay them at least a certain amount. They have to offer like certain types of defined benefits in order to actually even qualify to like submit something to government for contract work. So that's something to consider. I think that it's just something that they realize is not possible across the board because a government can do that because they have something to live up to. And it's also partially why they're so slow because they have to make sure that everybody gets those utmost benefits. But they are really aware that this is happening, and I think they're just not sure how to respond to it. I think that some governments see the peer economy and they see possibly the worst potential that can happen. And it doesn't just represent like the worst for the peer economy, but the worst like across the board, that everybody is gonna have a micro gig situation. So this is not to say that there's a solution, but I just want to like make it clear that government is thinking about these things. That's why they funded Gig Union, for example, is because they knew that the network itself had to be able to recognize itself first in order to even have that first step of coming together to lobby, right? And they are, I mean, like with the government, there is a workforce innovation grant now, and it's just gonna be slow. I mean, government's never fast, but I think one thing to think about too is not to think that everything is about public policy. If you think about the whole area as a distributed network, government can't be the only one that's responsible for everything or we're gonna be waiting forever. And by then, things will have moved on. We have to think about private entities like foundations, even companies. And when we think about public policy, we shouldn't just be thinking about how can we make sure that independent contractors are more protected. We should think about how do we incentivize corporations to actually take certain legal entities guarantees a much better working condition for their actual employees. So like, for example, B corporations, which are still relatively untested. They're benefit corporations. Instead of only being accountable to their shareholders, they, in theory, are also accountable to make a real social impact. And if not, they can be held accountable for that. So that hasn't been tested in court yet, but those sort of things where we can start to try to move people and support some of these types of entities. T Corps, for example, is the legal status for cooperatives. But that's not something that's recognized in every state. So how do we help that become something that's recognized in every single state, for example? So there are policy things where I think we can like push for really radical change, but there are also certain smaller things that are already starting to happen that I think if we start to support it from the ground up, then when a company does violate its B corporation status, it can't get away with it. Like it becomes a real accountability thing.
Well, at this point, I want to open it up. First of all, I'm just curious, how many people out there are freelance workers? Okay. So we're going to open it up for Q&A, and why don't we do that? I'm not sure how we're doing, if we're passing a mic around, or if people just want to...
Microphone up here on the chair. Feel free to come up and
yeah, start it.
Or just yell if you want to yell.
So you could line up, or you can scream. Doesn't matter. Yeah, please, introduce yourself and what you do.
Can I start?
Please, sir, go.
Thanks. Yeah, hi, I'm Bill Snyder, and I'm an officer of the Newspaper Guild here in San Francisco. I'm also a full-time freelancer. First of all, this was a really good panel. I want to thank everybody. I mean, I've done this for a long time, but I really learned from it. I want to say just a couple of things about what we do. I think one of the themes here was about new business models. And that's true of the union movement. We're looking for a new business model because for so many workers that don't have a common employer, that don't have a full-time job, what can a union do? Well, a union can do a lot, but it has to be different. As Apple would say, we have to think a little bit different. So one of the things we're doing in the Newspaper Guild, we're starting freelance groups. There is a freelance group in the Newspaper Guild here in San Francisco. I chair it, actually. It's called Guild Freelancers, and I won't go on for very long. But what we can do a lot in a small way of what Susie, for example, was talking about. Number one, press pass. Yes, we get people press passes, and in fact, they're respected by the police. They also get you into events, which is really nice. Okay, we do that. Another thing we do, we have health benefits for our members. Benefits being dental and vision, and they're really good plans. We do that. We have lobbyists, and they're good lobbyists too, right? They're part of the Newspaper Guild and the Communication Workers of America, which is our parent organization. So we really do lobby in Sacramento in particular. Another thing we do is we agitate. We agitate a lot, and the best example is, I don't know how many of you remember a campaign 2 years ago called Ariana, Can You Spare a Dime? Okay, well, you all know that early on, after Ariana sold the Huffington Post, I guess it was to AOL Time Warner, she often didn't pay the people who were contributing content. And her rationale was, well, you're getting great exposure. Well, as every freelancer here knows, you can't pay your rent or feed your dog with exposure. So we started a national campaign called Ariana, Can You Spare a Dime? It got picked up a lot in the media blogs, got picked up by NPR and some other places, and she backed off after we embarrassed her. So that's some of what we can do. And I guess just to end, I mean, we offer a lot of training for people at generally very low cost. We offer networking. We offer some legal support when possible and contract advice. Again, not to exaggerate, this is all small stuff, but it's a start. So I have some brochures for our organization, and you're all welcome.
Do you have a question?
No.
All right. Thanks.
Well, I would actually like to respond to one point there, which was that I was arrested while I had a Guild Freelancers Press Pass. It was not respected, and when I talked to the Guild about it, they were not supportive, and it was an active, huge problem for me, and so I let my membership expire because it was not useful.
Right. I'm aware of every bit bit of that. A couple of things. One is we learned from that. That was a mistake. Now, I had nothing to do with that personally.
I'm not saying that you did.
No, it's okay. I understand. No, I mean, what you're saying is very reasonable to say. But number one, we learned about that. And number two, frankly, the Oakland PD doesn't respect almost anybody's press pass.
Okay, I understand. It was just, there was no solidarity there for me. There was no support. I was told that the other people who were arrested were more important because they had staff jobs. And so when there was a press release that came out from the newspaper guild, it named everyone except me because I was a freelancer, and that's what I was told.
So I'll just jump in and say, this is interesting. You guys should definitely continue talking after at the refreshments and just don't throw any refreshments at each other. But I'm curious. I'm glad it came up, but I just want to get to all the questions that we have. So go ahead.
Hi, my name is Kirthi. I'm a filmmaker. My company is called Cinemagical Media. And I want to actually see if you have some insider resources for that catch-22 of I'm finally making a really good living as a freelancer, and let's use Obamacare as an example, where I won't even go into the problems in terms of the health insurance of how I'm paying into a system that then is like, billing me up the wazoo. But now I'm getting worried that I'm not even going to qualify for any of the discounts because I'm actually making money. So it's this interesting catch-22 that the more money you make, the more that's taken from these systems of health insurance, taxes, self-employment, so on and so forth. So at the end of the day, when I was making less money and in poverty, I actually had more take home. So I'm wondering if you have some insight, resources, or just how we can poke a hole in really being on the side of abundance and not scarcity and not worried about the more money you make, the less you make.
I mean, first and foremost, I'm sure as a freelance filmmaker, you own your own production company, you have business-related expenses all the time that you're writing off. Yeah. So I mean, I've found that at times where I did see myself entering different tax zones or whatnot, those are good times to kind of strategically figure out maybe I can acquire some more assets for my business for the following year, things of that nature. I'm not a tax specialist. I definitely pay somebody to help me out with some taxes, but at least to make sure, that what it is that I am writing off every year is reasonable, because I think that is also a difficult part when you are freelancing, is kind of figuring out, what is reasonable for me to be writing off and not, because sometimes, to be honest with you, it sometimes even starts making more sense to be freelance than full-time somewhere, because when you're full-time somewhere, you're getting automatically 40% or whatever, 35% of your paycheck taken out all the time. So.
But I think there's some things like this health insurance situation, right? Where we're in this real catch-22 that even if you're getting it through, right now there aren't collectives. It's just go to Obamacare and then you're paying into it and then you're getting double, they're paying so much and then your doctor's finding you. So it's I guess it's a little outside of knowing what to write off and the help. But thank you.
It's all kind of shockingly opaque. I think that, just talking to freelance journalists I know who didn't know that they had to file quarterly taxes the first time, and people who got huge penalties for years on end are now in debt, tax debt, just because they didn't know this basic thing. Because who's going to tell you? It's just a huge problem. I wish that there were resources that I could say there are, but I don't know, and it seems like a huge glaring thing that we should fix.
So I don't have an answer either, because of course it's a question that we all have. I'm pretty new to this, but what I do understand is that if you set up as an S-Corp, I think is what it is, then you can set your own salary first, and then that is what you pay yourself, and then after that you pay taxes for your business, rather than just getting taxed on everything twice. I don't know if that would be helpful or not. In terms of stuff that isn't as immediate, so this is why I kind of hesitate to talk about it, is I kind of see a parallel. So one of the situations that I've come up against in terms of my field work is thinking about, so I look at what are the barriers to participating on peer-to-peer marketplaces, especially if you might come from a disadvantaged background, a vulnerable population. And one of the things that we talked about, me and the city, we had talked about as we were thinking about who we wanted to find out more to help, right, is people on multiple welfare systems who are an extreme example of what you're talking about, but basically people who maybe are on on EBT or on certain healthcare programs, and maybe their kids are in Head Start. All of these different things have different income level requirements, so once you start to go, so you basically have to have the lowest possible income requirement to be able to benefit from all of those services. And one of the big issues is if you are using any of these platforms at all, and you're starting to generate money, which is good, but you're not generating enough. I mean, can you really generate enough within your grace period before they check again what your income is to offset everything you're about to lose, right? So one of the things that we've just sort of been talking about, even considering whether it's possible, is that at least on the, and this is totally a local level and not necessarily a national level, but a lot of the federal benefits are administered on a local level. And so that means that on a local level, to a very small-ish extent, government can kind of try to play with that and create more flexibility so that there's more runway for people. But that's a policy thing, so that might be something that's like way far off, but as something to keep in the back of your mind. Otherwise, all I know is S-corps.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Rachel. I'm a freelance artist and illustrator, sort of in the very beginnings of my, hopefully, what will be a freelance career. This is actually more of a social media oriented question rather than monetary. But Susie, I was interested to hear that you've somehow managed to really be successful in building your following on Twitter. And I guess, you know, this is something you can all chime in on, but what do you think is the ethical way to do that and the non-annoying way to do that? How do you not be obnoxious about putting your work out there and trying to get really, you know, your dream clients to see that? I'd love to hear your insight.
I mean, there's definitely some etiquette issues with it. I've never added people and been like, check out my stuff. I see that there are a lot of people who will do a long stream of like, I did a new piece today, and it's over and over again. It's the same copy-pasted tweet. Don't do that. Use hashtags judiciously. I would say, like, your little bio there, put your newest piece in your bio. Be really specific, lots of links, and strategically follow people who you want to pay attention to you at the right times. In the what are the peak internet usage times? You know, like mid-morning and mid-afternoon.
1 to 4 for Twitter.
Yes, exactly. And follow people right when you have something new out that you've just tweeted, and then you follow all the people that you want to notice. There are totally ways that you can game these things, and it's actually really easy.
Yeah, we were, when we launched our show online, we were so excited about, like, when we get covered in the Chronicle or NPR, we'd be like, oh my God, we're about to blow up. Get ready. And we'd look up and see like 4 referrals to the thing from the article. But it looked great because you could send it around. It looked really professional. And then something like Tubular would come up, or Black-Eyed, you know, some other site would come, and you'd be like, that's interesting. Is that your brother? Or who is that? And it would just have like, you know, I don't want to say thousands, we'd like have hundreds. But it was exciting because all these referrals, we were like, oh, we need to be in a different place. And it is like a low-stakes cocktail party or something where you can nudge people methodically to say, like in the end, we had Dana Perino, a former Bush press secretary, and Tony Hawk saying nice things. You know, it was like, where else were we going to find those 2 people to endorse our work? It was Twitter. So, yeah. Next question.
Also embrace that it's going to be random.
I'll actually say.
Oh, it's going to be random, and just embrace that.
I'll also add that something that's worked for us is to start conversations with people. You know, instead of just trying to plug your stuff and saying like, oh, this is something new that I've done, something that's worked for us is we found people that we admired or found organizations that we've admired and been like, oh, we really like that you do this. This is something really fantastic that you do. You know, how do we help? How do we be a part of it? And then inherently someone's going to come back and be like, oh, who said this to me? And they look at you and like, oh, what do these people do? And then, you know, if your product or if your service or whatnot is good enough, they'll come back at you and be like, oh, well, this is a good idea. You know, and that's a bit more that we found. I mean, your social media presence is far outweighs ours. So trust Susie's opinion more than mine, but we found that it's like a really authentic way and a genuine way to connect with people that in turn starts building those relationships more for the long term than just necessarily one-time viewing one of your projects.
I talk about donuts a lot on mine.
You will?
Donuts?
Donuts.
Yeah.
So yeah, it works. So this is my strategy. I talk about stuff I like, and I present links that I like, and I help other people that I like, and I don't talk about what I do nearly as much. Like, I keep it pretty low, and I just have a lot of people who appreciate that low-keyness, you know. And I feel like I talk about donuts, and then I link to Susie's work, and then I link to some weird stuff in nature, and then I link to muscle cars. Like, I link to whatever I want to, and then sometimes I bring it back to what I do, or I'll retweet something about Makeshift, and that just works for us too. And that's very not threatening for people, and they do feel like they know you as a person too, and then they remember, like, oh, that funny girl with the donuts, she does the drawings too. I mean, your thing may not be donuts, but it should. Yeah. Take my thing, it's cool.
It's true though, like, what was the most winning thing you said at a party? Was it, maybe it was like, it's weird, Starbucks people can't show their arm tattoos. What do you think about that? Or was it, look at my 16-page report on the intersection of journalism and technology? It probably wasn't that one. Sir.
Hi, I'm William, and I'm a slightly different, leaning. I'm a still emerging dance and cultural event photographer who's moving from semi-professional to fully professional. And in addition to getting event work, I want to relocate to New York City. I have done some writing on a voluntary basis for a small web publication called GBM News, global-based media that serves the Black, gay, lesbian community. But I was listening to your strategies. Is there in book form or a form how to market yourself to get into the abundant flow of event and photojournalism photography to blow up? And are there societies or individuals that I can mentor with? Because I feel like I have some pretty good pictures, and to get money to get better equipment, money to get more training, and just to get out of the box I'm in and fly.
I'll say right off the bat that something that I've just started learning this year as I started getting more involved in this whole crazy modern day gold rush going on in San Francisco with all this entrepreneurial stuff is that you got to figure out who your users, who your customers, who your clients are right off the bat. Step number one, figure out who it is that's going to be hiring you, right? So if you're talking about event photography, whether it's PR companies, agencies, event planners, you know what I mean? How do you find the list of those people, and maybe not necessarily hit them all with an email blast, but contact them and say, hey, do you have 10 minutes? Let me buy you a cup of coffee and show them some of your work. This is what I do. I'm trying to get my foot in the door doing this and this and this. It's laying down those types of relationships, that groundwork for those types of relationships, which I'm not going to bullshit you. It takes time. It takes time to do stuff like that. It takes time to contact people. It takes time to not get responses from people. It takes grit to basically keep going when you don't get responses from those people, but you just keep doing it and you keep at it and you keep meeting more people, and as you keep shooting more stuff, you get better. Your photos get better, your contacts get better, you start figuring out what it is that sticks and doesn't stick in terms of your relationships with clients as well. And I'll shamelessly plug my shit. You should sign up for GoForCrew, and then if there's like a random photography gig, you'll just get a notification and you can contact them directly, and it's no skin off your back and it's free. But that would be my recommendation, is sit down and do some like top level thinking about who it is my clients are going to be. Who do you want your clients to be? Do you want to shoot every single event going on, or do you only want to shoot particular types of events? Who's throwing those events? At the end of the day, we live in an utterly and completely transparent time where everything is super tracked and metrics and analytics and blah, 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 blah. Any research that you really want to find online, you can sit down and find. So figure that out first. Who are your clients, and then figure out an appropriate and appropriate way to contact them and get their attention in some sort of creative way. An example that pops to mind is an agency in New York, who the name slips me right now, but what they did was utterly brilliant. They were having a hard time finding new clients to work with, and they really wanted to attract some new business. What they did is they sent 10 top-tier clients a red, that stereotypical president phone, like the red phone that just has the one light on it. They took one of these phones, they made one of these phones, and you didn't need to plug it into a telephone jack or anything, you just plugged it in to the wall. And as soon as you picked up the phone, it automatically called the founders of this agency. And no explanation, they just sent this red phone to the 10 clients that they wanted to work with. All 10 of them picked it up and called them. And they were like, we love this, how can we do something together? You know what I mean?
Just to add to that as well, one thing is that a lot of people don't have time, so that's something to be really aware of. When you are requesting a meeting, even if you're offering to buy coffee and all of that, just make sure you know what you want to ask the person. I mean, there's so many people that you can contact, and it's, like Misha said, you can do the research ahead of time, but if you're just contacting them because they're one person among a lot of other people who are sort of in the area that you want to look at, people are going to probably turn you down for meetings, or they're going to feel like you wasted their time if they do meet with you. And that's actually even worse, is if they think that you wasted their time.
Yeah, agreed. Know what it is that you're trying to say. Know what it is you're trying to say, and be very cognizant of the fact that everybody in the world nowadays is super busy. And if they do give you 10 minutes, make sure that in that 10 minutes you figure out a way to wow them.
Yeah, or what you want to ask of them, right? Because sometimes you just want to learn from other people, but what is it that you think they know that probably very few other people know?
And I would just also add, the networking thing is, I can't stand going out and networking now at when you go to parties or something. I mean, because let the good speak for itself. You're saying you've got great photos. There's a way to angle that so you let it speak for yourself. When someone comes up to me and says, I've got a great video, you go, oh, kill me. It's the worst. Because that's not what you do. You don't talk about photos, you take photos. So to let the work speak for itself and be available and figure out a way to angle it so you put your best foot forward. I know I personally really try to do that, rather than, I never pitch or engage someone verbally unless I'm feeling crazy or something. But why don't we take the next question here? Thanks for that question.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Lisa Sussman. I am a creative marketing consultant. It's a niche I've carved out for myself. My question is probably going to be mostly directed at you. I'm looking to basically start an empire that I'll be the CMO of. I'm starting it from my studio apartment, so it's going great. But this will come around. I come from the punk rock world, which actually carries the ideals of authenticity, expression, disruption, innovation. And I've been trying to think of what is a business model for my empire that would bring these ideals. I would love to have a house with a pool, and if I can do that, that's great, and then I can end and do good things for the world. That's what I would like to do, is to leverage those kinds of ideals into a successful business model, but also with the house and pool. So my question is, with the last thing that you were talking about, you were talking about sort of these, moving towards a new paradigm of business model that is going to work for communities. The thing that came to me last night, I was thinking about, what about like a sort of for-profit, socially minded, community-centric corporate co-op? Is there any type of business model out there like that? Have you seen anything like that? Does that make any sense? And what would you say in terms of like the future viability of something like that happening and maybe penetrating the marketplace?
Okay, so you said for-profit, community-oriented co-op. Is that all the stuff that you said?
That is socially minded.
Socially minded.
But also makes house and pool.
Right. So I don't know, I mean, I know that there are groups that have come together as co-ops because they're all independent contractors and there's a lot more solidarity, a lot more rights that are afforded to you when you are in a group of 15 people or more and you're all considered employees. Suddenly OSHA applies to you and the Equal Rights Act suddenly applies to you. Fair labor standards suddenly apply to you. Unless you're a domestic worker, then it doesn't ever apply to you, sorry. It's a horrible thing. But basically, in terms of that type of model, where I've seen it happen most, where you also have the potential of a pool, is actually with developers, which is not, you know, that just more has to do with logistics and how much they can get paid for their work, which means that they can get started at forming that co-op a lot faster than other people, because otherwise what you have is just sort of like a guild in a sense, right? Like you all say like, hey, we have the same healthcare, we have the same sort of like system in which we operate for charging for work, but you don't necessarily share the profits because none of you are really making enough to do that, but you just kind of have shared principles. So it's not that that kind of thing can't exist, it's just that I think the only groups that have even a chance to, well, the groups that I've seen that have been able to start it from the ground up from the very beginning tend to be groups whose work is already really well paid. So that means that you can definitely do it, but it just might be one of those things where you're going to do it by yourself for a while, and then once you find a good group of people who can all pull in that amount of work together, then that's where it makes a lot of sense to start building that up and building it up and then becoming your major empire.
Sweet. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Ian Carruthers. My wife and I own a small video company here in town called Foolish Tree Films. And I think this may be a twofold question, answer which part you like. One is how, someone was saying to the two guys back, the high-level thinking, which I think is essentially saying business plan. How useful are traditional business plans, especially for smaller orgs or companies? And the other one is, I think, Rena, it was you, was talking about how maybe I don't want to make $1 billion. Maybe I want to make enough to do well and have a little aside for rainy days. Or I, at one point, thought I wanted an empire. I don't anymore. So I guess it's, is there room for something like a type B entrepreneur? Someone who, as a matter of fact, is not going to work 16 hours a day on that project for you, you know, because we have lives. So that's it. Business plan and type B entrepreneur.
I'll start a little bit, I guess. I feel like most of us in here probably don't want empire and a house and a pool. I mean, I wouldn't mind a house and a pool, but you know, and that everyone has a different situation. It's like, what's important to me right now? I have a almost 5-year-old. I want to spend more time with him and have enough money to take him to do fun things, and I want to run my businesses. But maybe when he's bigger, you know, then I'll want to grow the business a little bit bigger at that point. Or maybe I want to have a business where I can hire a manager, so it needs to grow to a certain other level.
Well, you can afford that.
Right. And the climate right now, you don't hear about businesses like that much, unfortunately. You hear about people who like make it big and then they had to grow overnight and blah blah blah, and it's really tough. So I think that's why being able to talk to more peers about, you know, where are you? Oh yeah, my business is about that big too. How's business going this year? Or, you know, I'm trying to find money to hire, but it's either like get more equipment or hire this assistant. What should I be doing? I think having a business plan is useful to help figure out answers to that. You can answer your own question that way. So I ended up having to write a couple of business plans for my business, and I hated it, and I sweated through it, and very few people saw the thing, but it was such a good exercise because you had to decide, what do I want right now? And then when opportunities come floating in, and you're like, what should I be doing? Like, you can refer back to it and say, oh, well, this sounds like a really awesome opportunity, but I would have to dip out of savings and put in a lot of money to hit it, and I wasn't planning on doing that yet. So I'm gonna have to say no for now and just grow in the particular way. Or, you know, maybe the opportunity can kick you up to that next level and it's absolutely worth the risk. So it'll help you assess things too. For that reason alone, I think it's good for everybody to write down some goals and what you will and won't do for money and how fast you wanna grow, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I think that, top-level strategic thinking is taking a little bit of time out of the week to kind of do that and be like, hey, what happened in the last month? Where am I going next month, the next 3 months, the next 6 months, the next year? I think that's a good exercise in general to do, whether business or personal-wise. I think that's something that at least I've found to be really helpful. And to the second part of your question, I do think that that's super possible. I think that, I don't know, this is the way I think about it. It's like, bro, we live in the future, man. You can pretty much get paid for any shit that you make up that you do. Like, you say, I do this, you'll find somebody out in the world who's going to pay you to go do it. Like, I can't guarantee you how much, but I think you can find somebody who will do that, especially with a little strategic search engine optimization and marketing or whatnot. And a great example of this is a guy that I connected with here in San Francisco earlier this year, really talented filmmaker named Ken Fisher. The dude's entire business is called Truth Be Told Films, and he only works with nonprofits, only wants to do movies for social justice and for the benefit of society, and he makes a decent living doing it. He keeps the integrity up. He doesn't work for peanuts. He makes sure that he gets good rates for his work. He is a talented enough dude that he can shoot and operate and edit by himself. And he takes his time with the projects,
Which is huge. It's the one-man band.
Right, which is another contradiction of today's time because, I have a big beef with the term videographer because I think that people use it very loosely nowadays to mean absolutely everything. And, we need to hire a videographer, someone who's going to write and edit and shoot and direct and produce and blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, it's like, bro, you're hiring a creative director who also does all these other things. It's like the one-man band. And I think that it's not a good way to go, to be honest with you. I think more and more people are doing it because, and I've done it, I'm not going to lie, I've done it many times for survival's sake, just to figure out ways to pay the bills. But at the end of the day, I find that all of it suffers. You don't produce as well, you don't direct as well, you definitely don't edit as well. It's like, there's a reason why these things traditionally back in the day had, very specialized roles for everyone, exactly, I believe nowadays what really does make sense is the skeleton crew. I think the skeleton crew nowadays really works. I think with 2 or 3 guys, you can, or 2 or 3 people, 3 or 4 people, you can create really, really amazing stuff nowadays. We're talking about drones flying around with GoPros. Like, literally the barrier of entry to all this shit is nothing anymore. Like, absolutely nothing. It's like, I met another great guy the other day who started a company called Camera Lens, and it's basically peer-to-peer camera gear rental. So instead of buying a drone, go and rent a drone from your neighbor who has it. You know what I mean? Also a great idea, and we're trying to figure out how we can, conjoin his idea and my idea and figure out a way to work together on it. So I think there is really a way to do it. I think it's never been harder in the traditional sense to work your way up. That's my opinion. It's never been harder in a traditional sense to go to college, go get a degree, blah, blah, spend $200,000 on something that's ridiculous that, I really do think is kind of ridiculous nowadays and setting this country up for some really terrible stuff. And it's never been harder to work your way up the ladder, traditionally a full-time job. However, at the same time, it's never been easier, and there have never been more tools and resources for people to grab a little chunk of the middle, right? Don't be greedy about it. Figure out what you want, and then grab your little chunk of the middle and figure out, make sure that people know what it is that you do, and figure out, and be okay with it. The worst part is if you end up somewhere and like myself, I went to film school, and then 5 years out of film school, I'm like, man, I hate running around with a camera shoving it in people's faces nowadays. That's just the truth of the matter. But if you're okay with it and you like doing it, man, there's absolutely no reason why you can't get that little chunk of the middle. I've seen many people do it, and I think it's totally viable nowadays.
So
just cut it out.
So 2 things. In terms of that sort of one-man band situation that you're talking about, I think it's really interesting because it actually goes back a little bit to what Susie was talking about, which was sort of getting together all of the people who are doing cartoon journalism and saying, hey, we don't have to keep undercutting each other, right? There's a market for all of us. One thing that I definitely experience, and I'm guessing a lot of people here experience as well, is when somebody says, hey, I want you to do this thing, and you're like, okay. Well, considering that it will take this and this and this and this, really what I should be charging you is this other amount. And then they'll say, that's a lot bigger of a scope than we were thinking. And it's not really, it's actually the same scope. They just don't realize that there are all of these different pieces that go into it so I have to do my part in educating clients. And that's a really hard thing, especially if you have a flooded market. And I think that is one of the long-term things that we have to talk about is how to educate clients rather than just trying to be that total, what is it called? Pocket knife? Yeah, Swiss Army knife. Yeah, and so that's one thing, at least collectively and on a solidarity level, I think is really important for freelancers to do, is to say, hey, if you do want me to do all these other things on top of it, I'm gonna have to charge you more, but you're also gonna have to understand that this is all the work you're asking for. It's not just one thing. But also, on another note entirely, you were talking about what was it, type B entrepreneur or something like that. So I think it's interesting. I just moved here from Boston, actually, about 2.5 months ago. And I've also lived in the Midwest, the Pacific Northwest, New England, the East Coast. And it's so fascinating to me because, and I'm actually from the South Bay originally, but the thing is that when you come out here, everybody talks about entrepreneurs, and the only people they're really thinking about are the ones who are always talking about disruption. But anywhere else in the country, yeah, you're aware of those people, but entrepreneurs are everywhere. One of the biggest populations, most entrepreneurial populations in the country is actually immigrants, right? They start their grocery stores or they start their small businesses and they help their community, but those are a group of entrepreneurs that is mostly invisible, but there's way more of those people than there are the ones who are trying to disrupt.
I love the idea about educating clients. And on a grander scale, I think that the figuring out what you are and are not willing to do for money is, especially just starting out, but all the way through your freelance career is incredibly important. I've definitely done things for money that I regretted afterwards, or saw an opportunity where I could have negotiated for more and I didn't, and I kicked myself for it, but I learned from it. But I think also, especially in the industry that I'm in journalism, there's really a lot of blurring going on about what's journalism and what's not journalism, what's content, what is paid content, and it's a weird time, and I think that it would be great to have some opportunity to educate clients because they really don't know what they're doing, and a lot of these people don't know what they're asking for, again, to Denise's statement, yeah.
All right, well, either the light is out or we're being asked to wrap it up. I will say, I think we've just come across the perfect tweet. You can find all kinds of shit for people to pay you for. I think that would be
I already tweeted that, actually.
Perfect tweet. But I want to thank everybody for participating in this and throw it to Mwende. This has been so much fun, and I'm imagining it will continue after, so thank you.
Yeah, let's give it. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks for all of your questions, and I know there are more questions. Luckily, we have the space for about another hour, and there's still food back there and drinks, and so we can continue this conversation in a more intimate way. But I just want to say thank you so much, all of you. This was a really stimulating conversation, and I hope we've planted some seeds in everybody's minds. There's lots of different ways we can all kind of move this forward and make things better for each other. So, BAVAC and Gig Union is always a resource you can look towards, and we are always pointing towards these great folks and the work they do. So feel free to come and talk to me afterwards if you have any questions about Gig Union. Where are all the other BAVAC people in the house? Can you wave your hands? If you want to talk to any of these kind folks about training or our job board on our website or jobs, how to get hooked up with jobs and internships, there are people in the room that can do that. So once again, let's do another round of applause for our panel. And that's it. And also there's some resources on the table back in the corner. So, all right, let's enjoy ourselves, guys.